Is Chirs Paul worth a max contract? Let's get into this. After years of losing in Phoenix, Chirs Paul elevated the Phoenix Suns to a level we haven't seen them in a long time. They're currently in the Western Conference Finals after sweeping the Denver Nuggets. And also before that, they also beat the Los Angeles Lakers, who a lot of people had them winning the whole championship. And Chirs Paul is of course a huge part of their success in Phoenix. He's doing it in multiple ways. He's doing it on and off the court. This Phoenix Suns roster is a pretty young roster, so a lot of people look up to a guy like Chirs Paul, who's been in the league for a while and is already a legend in the league. So off the court, Chirs Paul uses his experience to mentor a lot of guys on the team and really improve their games as well. I think that's a really underrated part of why this Phoenix Suns team is having so much success, just due to the fact that Chirs Paul's mentoring a lot of the guys off the court just due to his experience. But on the court, I think we've all seen what Chirs Paul is doing for the Phoenix Suns this season and how he improved them so significantly. But let's take his game point by point to really show how valuable this guy is to this Phoenix Suns organization. Because before joining the Oklahoma City Thunder in the previous year, Chirs Paul was seen as a guy that was washed in the league and wasn't really going to provide much for an NBA roster. He was just on a bad contract and nobody really wanted him. But after that OKC tenure where he really took the Thunder to the next step, he really growed his value in terms of his trade value and just value in general to what NBA teams were seeking for him. On the offensive end, Chirs Paul is a very elite scorer in this league still at this age. He has that mid-range game that we have seen a lot of, especially in that second round versus the Denver Nuggets. He was eating them alive with those wide open mid-range shots. So obviously that's his bread and butter, his mid-range shot, but he also extended his range all the way out to the three-point line where he's a pretty good shooter from there as well. But what he does very effectively is working in the pick and roll with a guy like DeAndre Ayton and getting those mid-range shots or three-point shots or even getting all the way to the basket. He could still do that as well. But now let's get into Chirs Paul's best trait, which is obviously his playmaking and passing ability. Throughout Chirs Paul's whole career, we've all known that this guy's a great playmaker and passer, and he's on the all-time list in terms of assists. And we've for sure seen that in this playoffs, and especially during the regular season for Chirs Paul. I mention this a lot with Chirs Paul, but he works so effectively with DeAndre Ayton in the pick and roll because he can either kick out to a wide-open three-point shooter, which the Suns have, which I think the Suns are also built very nicely with three-point shooters around Booker, Ayton, and Chirs Paul. But also Chirs Paul can just easily give it to DeAndre Ayton for an easy dunk for him, or kick it to whoever. There's so many options with Chirs Paul, and you never know what he's going to do. He's always going to find the open guy, which is a very effective thing to have on your team. Chirs Paul is literally the definition of a pick and roll maestro. But another thing I talk about a lot in my videos is on a typical NBA team that's trying to win a championship, or just in general a really good NBA team, you're always going to need that point guard that could settle everyone down, get the ball to your best players in the right spots, and just run the plays effectively in the clutch. And Chirs Paul does that perfectly. You've seen throughout the years, but especially this season with the Phoenix Suns, Chirs Paul is never phased in the clutch. He always knows what to do. He's under control. Even if he doesn't hit that game-winning shot, he's at least under control and knows what to do. Chirs Paul also at this stage of his career has a lot of experience, as I mentioned, and he knows when to attack for himself and also when to just pass the ball off and let Devin Booker work. He's never really forcing anything throughout the whole game. As we've seen for the Phoenix Suns this season, Chirs Paul has been so valuable to them, and he's provided them with so many things on the offensive end, as well as in terms of leadership, and in terms of the defensive end, especially at this age, he's still a pretty good defender. Throughout Chirs Paul's whole career, he was known as a guy who gets a lot of steals in his career, and even with the Phoenix Suns, even though he's a little older, he's a little slower than he used to be, he's still getting a decent amount of steals for the Suns. And on the defensive end in general, he's calling out a lot of things on the defensive end and just helping players out. The best word to describe what Chirs Paul does and provides at this stage of his career is just leadership. And at this point, a lot of people have the Suns as the favorites to make it out of the Western Conference, and if they do so, that would be a huge bonus on Chirs Paul's record. But to answer the question in this video, there's been reports recently saying that Chirs Paul wants a 3-year deal worth $100 million, and especially at this age, it's a little iffy for a lot of players. So to answer the question of the video, is Chirs Paul actually worth a max contract at this point? So Chirs Paul at this point, he's already 36 years old and getting older, obviously, and a lot of people at this point start to see a decline in their games. I think we started to see a decline in Chirs Paul's game a few years ago, but I think he reinvented what he does, and now he's very effective at what he does. But based on how well Chirs Paul is playing right now and how good he looks there out on the court, I feel like it's somewhat safe to say that we could see Chris Paul playing similar to this at least for 1 year, maybe another 2 years. So let's just say Chris Paul plays this well for another 2 years. If you're giving him a 3-year contract worth $100 million, I think he's definitely worth it if you're getting 2 years of this good of Chris Paul. The only issue with that is it's not a guarantee that he's going to be good for another 2 years, or at least this good, especially at this age. And we already saw it a little bit. He's a little injury prone in general, but especially at this age, you can get hurt a lot easier, as we've been seeing with guys like LeBron James, who usually never got hurt throughout his NBA career, but now since he's getting older, he's starting to get hurt a little bit. So a freak injury or whatever can happen at any point for Chris Paul, and if that were to happen, that could completely not only make his contract not worth it, but just completely derail his career and maybe end his career. You never know what could happen. Injuries aren't only a problem with an older guy like Chris Paul. Whenever you're giving a guy a huge contract, you always have to think about the injury aspect. How likely are they to get injured? Is it going to mess up my contract and my team if they get injured? If they're likely to get injured, I feel like you're not going to give them a huge contract. It's always an issue with any player, not only an older guy like Chris Paul. I like to look at Kristaps Porzingis as a perfect example to what I'm talking about. Before Kristaps Porzingis even signed that max deal with the Mavericks, there were some injury concerns already. He'd had a torn ACL, he had a bunch of leg issues before he signed that, but the Mavericks decided to sign him anyway. And even though this season he hasn't been injured, he was injured again last season for them, and he wasn't able in the playoffs and available in the playoffs, and maybe they could have won that Clippers series if he was playing. But even though he's playing this season, you can clearly tell that the injuries are affecting him, because now he's just a 3-point shooter. He's not getting to the basket as much as he used to. You could clearly tell the injuries are affecting him, and he's kind of a different player for it. We'll see if he can turn his career around, but right now he's not looking on the best track, and now the Mavericks are stuck with a guy who's just a 3-point shooter that they gave a max contract to. So injuries are always going to be a concern when you're giving a contract that big, especially to a guy who's 36 years old. But is Chris Paul really worth it given all those risks and rewards? I think it's a very tough call, and I think it can go either way with giving a $100 million contract over 3 years to a 36-year-old. But what Chris Paul provides to this Phoenix Suns team is pretty crazy and pretty immeasurable. And if you have a chance to win a championship within the next season or two for the Phoenix Suns, and you have to give Chris Paul that $100 million contract over 3 seasons, and even if he's really good that first season and win a championship with him, and the next 2 seasons he's completely awful, I think you still do so. I think overall it's a little bit of a tough decision just due to the age that Chris Paul is at, but I think what Chris Paul provides is pretty nuts, and I think if you're the Phoenix Suns, you kind of have to do that contract, especially if you do win a championship this season. I think it's tough to move on from him. If I'm James Jones and the Suns, I would try to negotiate with Chris Paul to see if you can get a little bit of a cheaper deal, but overall I would probably make that deal and sign him. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Chris Paul is worth his max deal, or do you think Chris Paul is too old and not really worth that max deal? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, please leave a like and subscribe and hit that post notification bell. It really helps me out a lot. Until the next time, peace out, guys.